Welcome back to the history of modern America up to the year 2020. Now class, I know you've all been jacking in lately and that we've moved our way up from the past to the current future. But now we need to talk about everything that happened during the 90s and the 2010s. The United States of America saw a lot of changes during that time, and it really affected the way that the 2020s have turned out. So, let's jump all the way back to the year 1989, the time when everything really looked up, but turned out to be going the opposite way. I'm your teacher, Dr. Hissy Tree, and today we're jumping back in the past 20 years. Everyone get your jacks ready? And let's jack in. Okay, let's get started with this history lesson. So, as we all know, 1989 saw the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War in the United States. Unfortunately, this peace was not to last very long, as right around the corner in 1990, the First Central American War began. The U.S. sent military forces into what is called the Canal Zone to suppress militaristic uprisings in Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador. Then, again, in 1991, the U.S. invaded Iraq, but we were, of course, victorious. In 1992, the European Economic Community signed a treaty that created the Eurodollar. The United States chose not to participate in what to them looked like an unfair treaty that would negatively affect the United States economy. This unfortunately began the beginning of the Quiet War between the United States and the EEC. This Quiet War affected the United States in an economically disadvantaged way. This economic blow was of course complicated by the United States amping up their war on drugs. The DEA decided to deploy a new type of weapon against the drug lords in Chile and Ecuador. They began to use designer plagues that targeted these areas of high drug activities. Unfortunately, the EEC did not agree with the United States' actions with these plagues. And there was a fair amount of unrest at home with people protesting this silent but deadly drug war. 1993 was a particularly deadly year for the United States when Colombian drug lords decided to retaliate, and they detonated a small tactical nuclear device inside the New York city limits. The death toll was somewhere around 15,000 at the time, but there were more deaths attributed to the nuclear fallout for years to come. All of this led up to what archaeologists and historians like to call the collapse. When the world stock market crashed in 1994, it hit America very hard. Many countries were affected by this, but the United States' economy took a really hard hit. And the United States government's reaction wasn't strong enough to prevent the corruption that seeped into all of our governments after the crash. This is the time that the Gang of Four rose to power, and then they brought the United States government down. By 1996, the now ubiquitous nomads and booster gangs first started to appear and develop across the nation. That same year, both the president and the vice president were sent out on campaign stops, and both were assassinated within days of each other. This was actually one of the first actions of the Gang of Four against the United States government. They were found to be the ones who organized the assassinations, and they were the ones that brought forth the then Secretary of Defense, Jonathan Seward, to address the Congress. In that address, acting President Seward announced that the Constitution was null and void, and declared a military takeover of the government in order to restore peace to the United States. Unfortunately for the Gang of Four, the emergency military government didn't want to play by their rules, and this led to a many-year cat-and-mouse game between the Gang of Four and the military interim government. The 1997 Mideast meltdown halved the world's oil supply. It's made prices in the United States skyrocket to the point where only the wealthy could afford gasoline. The Neo-Luddites began their act of terrorisms across the country, bombing airports, train stations, and anything they didn't deem to be worthy. Then the drought of 1998 struck. It hit the Midwest and the western states hard, destroying the American breadbasket and causing the food supplies within the United States to plummet. The same year, a 10.5 earthquake hit the state of California, reducing landmass by 35%. By the end of the 90s, the United States of America was in an ecological, sociological, and economical crisis that didn't seem to have any end to it, and the military government was too busy fighting with the Gang of Four to really do much to quell the uprisings inside the states themselves. This set the stage for the United States of America in the early 2000s and brought us into our modern era. Maybe not the most auspicious beginning for such a powerful country, but things do get better, my students, and you'll just have to jack in tomorrow to find out how. I hope everyone's taking notes because this is all going to be on the test. And remember to do your homework, watch all of your historical vids and all of your documentary vids. And if you have to, you can fax me your questions and I'll get around to them when I have time. Until tomorrow, be sure to study, study, study.